Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, July 28th, 2021. Ready for another show? Doesn't matter. Has to happen anyway. Let's see. Boy, lots happening this morning. As a matter of fact, I think Bill has his finger on it here. The Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now. The January 6th hearings and the new CDC guidelines are dominating the headlines. I think that's true. And Kagro X, me, David Waldman, and Dem from Connecticut, Greg Dworkin, are on it. Now, this is the interesting part. Like nuns playing with super glue. Now, what the hell? That's supposed to be. Okay, now playing with super glue, I understand that part. Do nuns have a particular proclivity for super glue that I missed out on somewhere? Did that happen in a movie? Somebody slipped on a banana peel? A nun slipped on a banana peel and fell on a tube of super glue. I don't know. I'm not sure. But it sounds good to me. And we're going with it regardless. And from now on, whenever you see a nun, right, what will you think of now? So, all right. So it's a little bit like filling in after the fact, sort of the Wikipedia approach to writing the jokes, right? I guess. Why not? We'll take a look around, see what there is to see in the news landscape. Greg has been preparing the infamous, I don't know, is it really infamous? The famous, I mean, just the regular good kind of famous raft of stories. Plenty to go on here today. If you go with your general news feed, the news is being dominated by Simone Biles and her withdrawal from Olympic competition. We mentioned that yesterday. Now, of course, I guess the new news is she's also withdrawing from the all-around competition, the big gold medal that everybody, I guess, expected that she was going to win, and maybe she might have. And now you can join in fanning the flames of the controversy by criticizing her decision to withdraw or criticizing the criticism of the decision to withdraw. But it sounds like kind of a straightforward thing to me. I guess the only reason that there's any room for any controversy is it looks like the right wing wants to turn it into a culture war issue. I don't know whether it's because Simone Biles is black. I don't know whether it's because they just take every opportunity. Maybe it's because she's a woman. Of course, all the gymnasts on the women's team are women, but they picked this one. I don't know. It might be just because she's so well known and it's a high profile thing and it's a chance for them to elbow their way into the discussion, and they want to talk about her weakness or that it's somehow un-American. They're depriving the rest of us of a chance to hear the national anthem played again. I don't know if you guys know how it goes, but if not, we can all hum a few bars. But that, and because, well, with right-wingers, things sometimes develop this way. They have difficulty understanding anything that isn't obvious and physical in nature. She broke her leg. She needs to withdraw from competition. They understand, although then they would probably say Antifa broke her leg. But instead, it appears to be an issue of, and I don't even know if I would necessarily classify it as an issue of mental health per se. I mean, I think that's what sort of came out of the discussion yesterday, and that gave them an opportunity to say, no such thing as mental health. You can tell by looking at us that there's no such thing as mental health. I don't think that one, breaks the way they think it does. But at any rate, as it turns out, it sounds like from what I've been able to gather, it is, I guess you would classify it under mental health, but it appears to be some sort of unreadiness in the mental state of things. I mean, everybody loves to comment in at least rhetorically about how much of the competition at this level in any sport is mental and about the mental preparation. But it wasn't so much like she was saying, I gather that it's not about her saying, well, I'm I'm too depressed to go win the Olympic medal for you. And so therefore, you won't win the free French fries in the McDonald's Olympic Games when I get a gold medal. And people are going to be suing her over that. And that's how the right wing takes it. But rather, whatever it is, the preparations for the games are such that she has difficulty focusing on and fixing in on what it is that she needs to be doing, which is, by the way, barreling, across the floor at literally breakneck speeds and flipping 18,000 times upside down and landing on her feet and not breaking anything doing that. And by the way, she has broken a few things doing that over the years. And she's practicing and she's like, hey, I don't feel right. I don't have the usual feel for what's going on. It's the moment of truth. I absolutely have to have that feel. And if I don't, it's dangerous to myself. And the team competition, it's dangerous to the team's ability to win a medal. If I can't perform my vaults and floor exercise, etc., to the highest level, the other people's medals are in trouble. Sounds like she did the responsible thing for the team, the responsible thing for herself, without even entering into the mental health question of it all. But by all means, we're going to have to enter into it because the right wing is reserving the right to psychoanalyze her and make it an example for all of America. And we should never have had Antifa or BLM or defund the police because something. I mean, they really think that this is an entree into that. But they're crazy, and they're the ones with the mental health issue. Anyway, I didn't mean to spend this much time on it, but I know that Greg actually has some interesting coverage of that situation, as well as the other things boiling over in every other kettle that we've got. Good morning, Greg. How are you doing?
Good morning. So I watched about 4.5 hours of the hearings yesterday.
Yes, the mental problems that people are having.
I think the proper thing to do is to refer them as hearings, even though they're one, but they will be a series, so might as well call it that.
I heard them with both ears. That's 2 hearings.
That's 2 hearings. But I do want to mention the Simone Biles things. First of all, one of the reasons there's so much in the news in terms of vituperation is that Charlie Kirk, who's head of the TP USA, Turning Point USA, decided to make it a big deal.
Yes,
I guess he thought Ben Shapiro was getting too much attention, so whenever that happens, Charlie Kirk says something stupid. And in this case was calling Simone Biles weak, as if she couldn't crush him. Both with performance and accomplishment. And what happened, I think you summed up beautifully what happened, but this is an interesting perspective.
It was beautiful.
From a former gymnast and diver named Catherine Burns.
I saw that you had this at the ready.
So, who was talking about this on Twitter yesterday and says, "Hi, your friendly neighborhood former gymnast and diver here to attempt to explain the mental phenomenon Simone Biles is experiencing. It's called the dreaded twisties." Mm-hmm. When you're flipping or twisting or both, right? Not simple, because it's very disorienting to the human brain. When training new flips and twists, you need external cues to learn how it feels to complete the trick correctly. In diving, a coach yells out and you kick your body straight and pray.
Yeah, hope you got it right.
You're going to hit the water pretty hard because, there's no turning back at that point. Once you practice the trick enough, you develop the neural pathways that create kinesthesia, which leads to muscle memory. Your brain remembers how your body feels during the trick, and you gain air awareness. Think about something that took you a while to learn and required a lot of concentration at the time to get it right, but now is second nature, like driving.
Okay.
Especially if you happen to drive with a stick. I don't, but I get the idea. Suddenly in the middle of driving on the freeway, right as you need to complete a tricky merge, you've totally lost your muscle memory of how to drive a car. You have to focus on making you foot press the pedal at the right angle, turning the steering wheel just so, shift gears. And it's terrifying. You're moving too fast. You're totally lost. You're trying to think, but you don't usually have to think. And it just feels bizarre. Yeah. And I don't know if that's ever happened to you. Certainly in the course of my career of driving in the middle of the night, to the hospital, it's not like I forgot how to drive, but sometimes I have my mind on something else, and then I look up and say, where am I?
Yeah, okay.
I forgot exactly where I was. I wasn't paying attention. I was thinking of something else, and I'm driving.
Yes.
And, do I stop to reorient myself? It's scary.
That's not the thing to do. Right, yeah, sure. Other way, another way of explaining it, although maybe less easy to understand, is suppose I threw you off the damn diving board right now today and turned you over as I threw you and told you don't go into the water wrong. Make sure you go in head first. And you realize I have no idea how do I bam and belly flop and then say, oh well, that must
don't worry, just do it right.
Yeah, that's essentially it. No, that's a great explanation though of how it is, because the whole thing, diving, any sport, diving, gymnastics, what have you, is about practicing enough to make the otherwise impossible look easy. Like you could do this. Look how naturally and smoothly I'm doing it. You just get up there and turn. And
right.
Then,
So
course,
Catherine Burns says, look, it's
not really
terrifying.
how it is.
You're moving way too fast. You're totally lost. You're trying to think, but you don't usually have to think. And the twisties are like this, and it often happens under pressure. You're working so hard to get it right, you stop trusting your muscle memory. You're getting lost in the air, second-guessing your instincts, overthinking everything. And it's not only scary and unnerving, it's incredibly dangerous. Even if you're doing basic gymnastics, the level of skill Simone throws, combined with the heightened power she gets, can lead to catastrophic injury if you're not confident and connected to your kinesthesia. And this isn't as easy to fix as just sleeping it off and trying again tomorrow.
She tried that, though.
It can look like retraining entire routines. I never mastered my front 1.5 with a full twist because I get the twisties and it would mess my other twisting dives. So when Simone says she's taking it day by day, that's why. She's not soft. She didn't choke. She's not giving up. It's a phenomenon every gymnast and diver has experienced, and she happens to be experiencing it at the Olympics.
Yes.
And can you imagine the frustration and the heartbreak? I'll also add, Simone Biles choosing to bow out pushes back against the dark narrative in gymnastics that you sacrifice yourself for the sake of the sport. I can't help but keep thinking, what was it, the Japanese gymnast who broke his ankle and had to stick the landing a few years ago? Remember that?
Yeah. Yes.
And he did. And the whole thing was, oh, what a hero. He won the gold medal. Look at the pain on his face. And that's your model of how you're supposed to do it.
Yeah.
And maybe that's not a great model.
Maybe not. And, she hints at considerably worse. I mean, if you're tumbling and twisting and like up on that balance beam. I mean, how many times have you watched a balance beam routine and said, if there's just one thing wrong with that, you're going to break every bone in your body.
Yeah, you're going to land on your chin.
Yeah.
You sacrifice yourself for the sake of the sport. You're the product of your coaches. You owe them wins, no matter the personal cost. No, you owe nobody anything, and you especially don't owe them your body, your health, or your autonomy. I hope every single tiny baby gymnast gets that message on self-advocacy and setting boundaries loud and clear. Thank you, Simone Biles. So I thought that was pretty insightful.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it really is pretty incredible the way you have to learn by doing the thing. I always wondered about that. How do you figure out the first time that you try it that you can eventually, do 4.5 flips off of the top bar? Because, there's got to be 100 times where you made it to 3.5 and then you fell.
I mean, it happens in any sport that you're pretty decent at.
Yeah.
You don't have to be Olympic level. I mean, table tennis.
I guess.
Ping pong, You're playing and everything's going in a rhythm and everything, and then all of a sudden your shots are going long. And then, why? It's the same thing I just did. Why is it not working now?
I see.
Now I better think about it. Now I'm going to play differently.
Once you're thinking,
and that happens.
Yeah, sure, that does. I mean, I don't think it's as dangerous in table tennis.
No, it's not dangerous. But the point is, you were playing without thinking.
Play.
And now all of a sudden you have to think about it. And once you start thinking about it, you're not playing the same way.
Yes, that's certainly true. And add the element of danger and the team sport and everybody depending on you. And
Gil
it's
Hodges
on
hitless
TV
streak
around
for
the
Brooklyn
world.
Dodgers.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it was years and years and years ago, but everybody in Brooklyn was, lighting a candle for Gil Hodges, who was hitless, right, in the playoffs, right in the World Series, right when you needed it the most. These things happen, and he's not a bad player.
No.
And when people go hitless in playing baseball, it's literally a game of inches, and it's not like all of a sudden I'm not a good athlete anymore. It's not working. Something's not clicking.
Yeah.
I'm not hitting my corners when I pitch. Something's not quite right, and it may not be an injury, but things have to work perfectly for you to do what you do, and so that can happen.
Times, all it takes in some of these situations is I wonder if I'm going to be able to do this. Well,
Right.
if you're not
Well,
sure,
it's in the middle of the
it's
World
too
Series.
late,
If you're not
man.
sure now.
Yeah, right. Well,
Imagine up on a
okay.
diving board.
No, because if
I
I'm
wonder
sure
if
I could do it, I'd probably
now
turn
is
around.
not the time to really start thinking
Yeah,
about
really. I mean, standing 10 meters up and then saying, I don't know, man. Don't find out then.
this.
Yeah.
What if this is the day? I don't do it. I don't know. Don't think that. No.
Yeah.
So it's hard. It's hard. But I think that was a pretty good explanation. But
I thought
so.
so.
To me, the big news yesterday wasn't that. It wasn't
right,
what Charlie
yes, that's
Kirk
true.
thinks.
No.
It was the hearings. And I don't know if you watched any of them. You tend not to watch those things.
They happened right in the middle of my whole, show thing and all that.
Yeah, But
Right.
they were searing.
Yes.
They were
Searing hearing.
very emotional,
Yes.
especially when
fearing.
Officer Fanone slammed the desk and said, "This is disgraceful."
Yeah, it was.
And the fact
show.
that Jim Jordan and the clowns weren't there to disrupt that was phenomenal because you got the gist of what was going on here.
Yeah.
And
Right.
it was carried live by the cables, including Fox News, live ABC.
Yes.
CBS and NBC didn't carry the whole thing. I think they carried at the beginning or the snippets of it, but I know that ABC did. And NPR and MSNBC didn't bleep out any of the F words that were used
Oh, yeah, that was fun too.
because they said it's an important part of the historic narrative.
Okay. You can do it on the MSNBC.
Right, but even NPR didn't do it.
Oh, right. Oh, you said that was NPR. Well, okay.
NPR then had a later disclaimer. Remember, this is live,
Yeah. All right.
right? Except for people
National
who are dead.
Profanity Radio.
Yeah. So it was very, very compelling watching, just as everybody knew it would, which is why Kevin McCarthy didn't want it to happen.
Yes.
And it happened anyway.
Right.
And so they had a press conference trying to distract from it, which didn't work. And the coverage was pretty searing. And again, I remind you, a lot of these reporters were there that day,
Yeah.
and they're still having issues about it, and they still lose sleep over it. And so, it's covered the way it's covered. Now, interestingly,
Gymnastics.
there was a pretty good reaction. For example, this morning, just now on CNN, Officer Michael Fanone was asked to react to Fox News personalities mocking his and his colleagues' testimonies.
Gee, I
And
wonder
he
which
said in
ones.
his career experience testifying in court, defense attorneys, in this case Fox, resort to theatrics when they're out of good arguments. Which is
Okay,
exactly
true.
why you didn't want Jim Jordan clowning during this. So, Pelosi
Yeah.
played that exactly right, and McCarthy played that exactly wrong. And how is it covered? Margaret Sullivan has a great column on that this morning.
Well, good
Our
job.
democracy is under attack. Washington journalists must stop covering it like politics as usual. And references something we've talked about forever. Back in the dark ages of 2012, two think tank scholars, Norm Ornstein and Thomas Mann, wrote a book called It's Even Worse Than It Looks, about the rise of Republican Party extremism and its dire effect on American democracy,
Okay.
making the point that it's both sides. Margaret Sullivan manages not only to bring in Norm Ornstein, but also Jay Rosen into this piece, at least indirectly. In a related op-ed piece, she says, these writers made a damning statement about Washington press coverage, which treats the two parties as roughly equal, and everything they do is deserving of similar coverage. Ornstein and Mann didn't use the now in vogue term both sidesism or false equivalence, but they laid out the problem with devastating clarity. We understand the values of mainstream journalists, including the effort to report both sides, but a balanced treatment of an unbalanced phenomenon distorts reality. If the political dynamics of Washington are unlikely to change anytime soon, at least we should change the way that reality is portrayed to the public.
All right.
Nearly a decade later, this distortion of reality has only grown worse, thanks in part to Donald Trump's rise in power and his ironclad grip on an increasingly craven Republican Party, although his chosen candidate lost in Texas in a special election last night. That's an aside. Positive proof was in the recent coverage of congressional efforts to investigate January 6th. The Democratic leadership has been trying to assemble a bipartisan panel that would study the mob attack and make sure it never is repeated. Republican leaders have been trying to undermine the investigation, cynically requesting that two congressmen who backed efforts to invalidate the election be allowed to join the commission, then boycotting it entirely. And the media's played straight into Republican hands, seemingly incapable of framing this as anything but base political drama. And actually, she even quotes one of my observations about she's not quoting me, she's quoting the observations that one of the Politico reporters, Rachel Bade, was just awful about this. What you're doing is unprecedented. McCarthy-Pelosi feud boils over, read a CNN headline. After a whiplash week of power plays, tensions are at an all-time high. Is it really a feud when Republican Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy performatively blames Democratic Speaker Nancy Pelosi for refusing to seat Republicans, two sycophantic allies of Trump who called the January 6th mob to gather? One writer at Politico called Pelosi's decision a gift to McCarthy. That was Rachel Bade. And its playbook tut-tutted the decision as handing Republicans a legitimate grievance, thus dooming the holy notion of bipartisanship. Both parties have attacked the other as insincere and uninterested in conducting a fair-minded examination, a Washington Post news story observed. Can it really be lost on the Post that the Republican parties acted in bad faith at every turn to undermine every attempt to investigate January 6th, a reader complained to me? The bankruptcy of this sort of coverage was exposed on Tuesday morning when the January 6th Commission kicked off with, it's not a commission, it's a committee, kicked off with somber, powerful, pointedly non-political testimony from poor police officers attacked during the insurrection. Two Republicans, Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, even defied McCarthy's boycott to ensure the party would be sanely represented. And again, I point out this is a bipartisan committee, so shut up about it not being. You're just wrong. Get off the pundit stage if that's what you keep saying. This strain of news coverage, observed John Alsop in Columbia Journalism Review, centers on twinned dubious implications. Bipartisanship is desirable, and Democrats bear responsibility for upholding it, even in the face of explicit Republican obstructionism. And this stance comes across as both cynical, politics was ever thus, and unsophisticated. We're just doing our job of reporting what was said, which is quite a feat.
Yeah.
Right? Mainstream journalists want their work to be perceived as fair-minded, nonpartisan, and they want to defend themselves against charges of bias, so they equalize the unequal, and the practice seems ingrained, and it seems unresolvable, but there is a way out. It requires the leadership of news organizations to radically reframe the mission of its Washington coverage. I'll offer these recommendations. Toss out the inside politics frame and replace it with pro-democracy. Stop calling the reporters who cover this stuff political reporters and start calling them government reporters. Stop asking who the winners and losers were in the latest skirmish, which is why, although I get it and I read it every day, I don't take to heart what Punchbowl and Politico are telling me about the ups and downs of the infrastructure week.
Yeah.
I don't really care. I just want to find out whether or not it passes. I don't really care if it's up today and down tomorrow, and then up today and then down tomorrow, and then up today and down tomorrow. You know, wake me in 2 weeks when it's over. Start asking who is serving the democracy and who's undermining it. Stop being savvy. That's where Jay Rosen comes in. And start being patriotic. In a year-end piece for Neiman Lab, Andrew Donahue, managing editor of the Center for Investigative Reporting's Reveal, called for news organizations to put reporters on a new style democracy beat. The reporters won't see the work in terms of politics, but through the lens of honesty, fairness, and transparency. And I'd make it more sweeping. The democracy beat shouldn't be just some kind of specialized innovation, but a widespread rethinking across the mainstream media. Good luck with, cable, because that's not their model. Right. Their model is point, counterpoint, Tucker Carlson. You guys are all dicks, to quote Jon Stewart.
Right.
Right. Top editors, Sunday show moderators, and other news executives, and he was talking about Tucker Carlson specifically, which is pretty funny. Top editors, Sunday talk show moderators, and other news executives should pull together their brain trusts to grapple with this, and they should be transparent with the public about what they're doing and why. And as a model, they might have to swallow their big media pride and look at places like Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, public radio station, WITF. We covered this on the show, which has admirably explained to its audience why it continually offers reminders about the actions of those public officials who tried to overturn the 2020 election results. Or to the Cleveland Plain Dealer, editor Chris Quinn's letter to readers about how the paper and its website, cleveland.com, refused to cover every reckless, attention-getting lie of Republican Josh Mandel as he runs for the U.S. Senate next year. These places prove that a different kind of coverage is possible. Mm-hmm. Is it unlikely the most influential Sunday talk shows, the most powerful newspapers and cable networks, and the buzziest Beltway websites will change their stripes? Maybe. But to return to Ornstein and Mann in 2012, it's necessary. It's a necessity. Mm-hmm. We've been studying Washington politics and Congress for more than 40 years, and never have we seen them this dysfunctional, they wrote. They couldn't have imagined the chaos that followed the members' election, the horrors of January 6th, or what's happened in the past few weeks, and the change they call for never happened, but for the sake of American democracy, it's now or never.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what she thought, and I think that's right. And I think the coverage, really has to be put. Don't give me this. Well, Pelosi played right into Kevin McCarthy's hands. What are you, stupid? The American public saw yesterday how stupid that point of view is.
Yeah.
Even Fox covered it in its entirety, uncensored. And when that happens, it's a very, very different presentation to the public than what we're used to, and a better one, I would add.
Yeah. Well, summarized there. I did spot one thing that made me want to shout out was about I think said in passing about Pelosi, refusing to put two of the members who voted to reject the electoral college count and keep them off of the committee. It should probably be noted at that point that there was at least one other Republican member who also voted the same way, who she was perfectly willing to allow through, as a matter of fact. And she had said early on that vote won't be the litmus test for whether or not you get on the committee, and it wasn't. And everybody's still writing that it was, which is weird.
No. Her standard was the Jon Stewart one. Don't be a dick. Oh, you two guys are? You're not on.
Yeah, right. I just right here in a piece that actually recognizes that there's so much else going on. It was just difficult to hit every single point. But I don't know. We snuck that one in before the break anyway. But just a reminder, because that may come up in your weekend conversations with somebody and say that should be the litmus test, or Pelosi was wrong to make that the litmus test. Well, it wasn't one, so you don't have to argue about it anymore. Congratulations. So now you have the rest of your weekend free. All right, we take a 2-minute break. We'll regroup. I don't think there's any more to do about Simone Biles. Nobody's going to flip or twist during the break. We'll be back. There's much more happening.
Hi, everyone. It's me, Gil. Minimal contributor to content, but regular contributor to funding for Kagro in the morning. Let's change things up from David's so very tired plea for your contributions with a plea of my own. If you want to add your voice to the show, do it. Record your own segment using your favorite recording device and send it to David. Read an article and give your opinion. Write your own essay and read that. The sky's the limit. Well, not really. Try to keep it relatively short so David doesn't have to stress about cutting it and hurting your feelings. Join the hallowed ranks of Greg Dworkin and Joan McCarter and be part of this somewhat witty deep dive into political topics with unnecessary censoring. Lend your voice to the show by sending it to kagrox@gmail.com. KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I said there was more going on. There really is. Greg's got a lot of it collected. Where do we want to jump back in on this?
So I want to continue with the hearings yesterday.
Okay.
And this is perhaps a broader view of what exactly is going on here, and what are they trying to do, and how is it set up, and what's the theory of the case here, and how are they doing the presentations. Okay, and I think, you can certainly start by saying, okay, fine, the Democrats, as you listen to this, and this is the insight of a fellow named Seamus Hughes, who started his career as a congressional investigator working on months and years-long investigations, and he spent the last 6 months looking at nearly every angle and arrest related to January 6th. He currently is looks like he's faculty at George Washington University, and I read a lot of court records because I like a good story. He says he's former Senate counterterrorism advisor and U.S. government intel policy officer. So he has some insight as to how to actually conduct an investigation, which, after all, is what this January 6th committee is doing.
Yes, right.
And, many people will look at this and say, well, why didn't you have this person or that person on the first day? Why didn't you just get to the point here? What's the point of having the officers break our hearts by telling us stuff we already know?
Well, A lot of it was new, but yeah, okay.
Well, but that's some of the stuff I've seen fly by.
Sure.
And he says, look, staff. It comes down
Okay.
to staff. When you hire and who you hire tells you about where the investigation will go. We saw that with Mueller when they started hiring people who were experts at financial crimes.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Right. I remember that.
Right? Who you hire tells you about where the investigation will go. You want three types of folks. You want people that understand politics, people that like to dig and ask the right questions, like a Marcy Wheeler type.
Yes.
And finally, people that can write. And here's why. The first bucket, people who understand politics, is important. And we see that play out today as we watch the hearings. The first hearing sets the tone. With the law enforcement witnesses, the investigation seeks to set the tone that this was not just a simple protest. You never have your first hearing with government witnesses. You may ask, why isn't FBI or Department of Defense testifying today? It's because it takes time to understand what you should ask and what not to ask. You only get one shot at them on the record, so you wait. In fact, you wait till near the end of the investigation. You put the politic folks on the task to enable the investigators. What's the public framing that forces agencies to take the committee's inquiry seriously? How do you ratchet up that pressure, especially important when you don't have jurisdiction? So the politics folks also work with the other committees to get them on board. For example, Senate Rules and Senate Homeland have reports out, but getting their staff's notebooks or tips that were left in the writing room didn't make it into the report is almost as important as the public findings. And you also don't need to expend limited staff resources reinventing the wheel. If an Inspector General report already looked at one aspect and did it well, take their findings, make it into the mosaic. Focus on the unknown or the underdeveloped lines of inquiry. Which brings me to the second set of folks, the diggers. Folks that know what stone to unturned, how to ask questions. One's not afraid of getting on a plane in 6 hours to some random town. This is the staff he's talking about.
Yeah.
Liz Cheney plays that role at the committee. But, you need your staff to go and do the groundwork for you.
Yeah, otherwise she doesn't know how to, what to highlight when she speaks.
Exactly. Was somebody not afraid to get on a plane in 6 hours to some random town to meet that one source that nobody's talked to yet? At this stage of the investigation, doc requests should go out for everything. The departments will balk at it. It starts a dance of what they'll provide and what they won't, although it was very helped yesterday when the Department of Justice, for example, told people that they could cooperate. And by the way, they're not going to defend Mo Brooks saying that I'm going to stand on privilege.
Right. Yes.
Right. All of that means, okay, well, the pressure is beginning to ratchet up that you should cooperate. So you lean on the politics folks to help you force the hand. You ask for more than you need and then concede when you have to. And, maybe it's no coincidence that the Department of Justice released all that stuff now as the hearing is going on. Just a coincidence, maybe.
Sure.
Maybe not. It'll either go one of two ways. Either departments will stonewall and give you nothing, or they'll bury you in documents, boxes of documents. They hope you don't open page 8,845 of the 6th box to see that one footnote ultimately drives this investigation. They usually stonewall and then give you documents, and when they give you documents, they're surprisingly all classified. That's a side, but that makes life harder because they know that. Then you have to work out of the SCIF because they're classified documents, separate laptops, can't discuss in your regular offices. I've been part of investigations where departments realized who had clearance and who didn't, and they game it out. So those with clearances don't have the skill set to know what to look for, and those that don't have clearance are the ones that do, and it's pretty clever. So you get to a point where that'll come to a head. I'll explain that in a bit, but documents alone don't tell the story. You need the context between the black and the white, so your diggers should be doing interviews too. It's a lot like journalism, actually, source building. And immediately after every interview should be written up in the same uniform format so you can share it among your colleagues. And at the end of the day, you crack a bottle of whiskey and go through it as a team, exhausted, but sometimes exhaustion brings a breakthrough find. It's not enough to be just a good investigator. You also have to know your target, how they talk, their culture. Oh, examples you could cite off the top of your head, David. For example, if you ask the FBI to talk to an SAC and not an S period, A period, C period, if you ask for a SAC and not an SAC, they know the investigator doesn't know what they're talking about, and they don't have to talk to them.
I see. Yes, right. Okay.
Right? If you call it FIBI and not the FBI,
yeah, we should.
If you call it WHO and not WHO, You obviously don't know what you're talking about.
Right. Okay. A clip instead of a magazine.
Exactly. Finally, the last group of staffers should be writers. A good investigator can get the information, few pull it all together in a compelling way that the public can understand, bring the writers in throughout the process, and they ask good questions that force you to go back to sources. And when you get to the writing phase, you'll find half your stuff is classified, and the departments will say, too bad. They'll say, do a public report in a separate classified. Don't fall for that. Ask for an original classification review from outside agency to check the classification, and if that doesn't work, the nuclear option's always on the table. Prep your congressman to threaten to read the full report on the House floor, protected about classification charge by speech and debate, and you only get to do that once, so don't threaten early, but do it. And I'll end with this. There'll be ebbs and flows in the investigations. The cameras will stop coming to hearings. As a staffer, you got to grind it out, keep your head down, do your work, and hope your boss has your back. Let the members deal with the politics. You aim for the truth. So that's the advice to the staffers, and it's the staffers that make or break these investigations.
Yeah. All right.
But, it also helps point out what happened yesterday. Yesterday was set up to be compelling watching. Everybody watched. They get the idea yet again, because it was 6 months ago, that, something important happened, and all this BS about it being just tourists and nothing happened and you're making too much of it and it was a few bad apples, not after what was presented yesterday.
Yeah.
All that
difficult
prep work that they did for 6 months to try to minimize what happened, the great patriots, all went out the window with the video.
Yeah, and also a great choice in terms of the witnesses that they put up there. The only thing that Republicans had in their playbook was, attack and push back and question the validity of what was presented. And if you present it all from cops, that means
you don't back the blue, and that your whole entire 2022 re-election campaign of law and order falls apart because you're clearly shown to be hypocrites, by the way.
You got to spend the whole day attacking cops. All right. I mean, you can do it, and some people will follow you in on it and stay with you all the way through, but it's going to be a full day of Republicans hate cops. So
right. And by the way,
ready for it.
As an interesting aside, it also exposed the Fraternal Order of Police and other organizations who refused to back these cops.
Isn't that interesting?
Because they happen to be Trump-loving, and they were at some of the rallies and such, the leaders of these organizations, and refused to back cops when, in fact, cop backing was exactly what was called for here.
Yeah. Pretty amazing that they
You don't have
do
our
that
backs,
when
and therefore
it's really
that
not
exposes
called for.
you for what you are.
Yeah. That will change some perceptions. True. We should talk more about that, like for several days.
So all of that happened, yes, and that's why I think the hearings were important. They were well done. They accomplished what they were trying to do. They were not trying to accomplish Trump's guilt on day one, although his name kept coming up over and over and over and over. And again,
they did lay that out. The cops said so.
There were Trump flags. There were Christian flags. There were people who claimed that Jesus is my savior and Trump is my president, over and over and over again. And in fact, during the impassioned testimony about what happened, a lot of it was linked to, well, who'd you vote for?
Yeah, that's true, and a lot of overt. They really went above and beyond and tried to. I guess I don't know whether they were. It must have been planned in, so it wasn't something about them sneaking it in. But the cops did make overt reference to Trump and overt reference to where the investigation could, in fact, go in the future, even though that wasn't their role. Saying
there were two ways they did that.
Okay,
right.
That's true.
You were saying they were saying.
You say it.
Well, one of them. First of all, the questions were simple. That's what was so great about not having the grandstanding dicks there.
Ah, yes.
Okay.
Right.
The questions were simply, could you please tell us in your own words what you saw? That was the question.
Yeah.
It wasn't leading.
Isn't it true that you once? Yeah, right. None of that.
Just simple. Just tell us what you saw. And in the process, they were saying, well, we got hit on the head with a Trump flag.
Yeah. Right.
Okay. And that's one of the ways that it came up. The other way it came up is one of the officers said, look, they asked, well, what do you want to come out of this investigation?
Yes, right.
And he said, well, look, if a hitman commits a crime, that hitman goes to jail, but the person who asked him to do the hit also goes to jail. And that's what we need to know, and that's what we need to get to the bottom of. And again, that was solicited by simply asking, what do you want? Mm-hmm. What did you see? What happened? And now that you told us what happened, what do you want to come out of these hearings? And those are not leading questions.
Yeah. And they really were effective in the way they were perceived outside. I think at some point during the day, I saw Larry Sabato out there using the T word, saying that this was pure treason as he was describing what he was watching on TV. Like, wow.
What's the penalty for treason?
Yeah, I did ask that. I asked him directly and put it out there and said, what's the penalty for that again? And by the way, will there come a point in history where history will demand to know why we didn't carry that penalty out?
You see, I'm following the thread here.
Yeah. Unbelievable. I mean, to get, and of course, right, wasn't it the other day we found out that Republicans in, it was not just Virginia, but elsewhere, I guess also. So Larry Sabato is now over the cliff. He's said the word treason. And
he must be a partisan.
Both sides are guilty of treason here somehow by the end of the week. But okay, yeah, that was pretty amazing to see it come out that way. And I imagine he'll backpedal off of that, but he shouldn't because he was right.
Right. So again, just putting the hearings in context, what were we seeing? What were they trying to do? Did they do it? Did they hit their mark? The answer is yes, 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 and yes. In fact, way better than I expected.
Yeah, pretty.
And it was
good.
just so refreshing not to hear the counterpoint nonsense come out. In fact, Fanone had said, in my experience with testifying in court, you do a lot of show and you make a lot of noise when your arguments run out of steam. And so that's exactly what Jordan and Banks and the other Republicans would have done. In fact, during a committee hearing yesterday, Jamie Raskin, who I guess was part of this hearing yesterday, it was part of the committee, nailed, I don't know how he did this on the floor of Congress as part of a hearing, but he was nailing Representative Clyde, who claimed that, this was all tourist stuff.
Yeah.
And just tried to get him to say, listen, you have your chance now. Would you like to backtrack and, revise and extend your remarks based on what these guys testified this morning? And Clyde wouldn't do it. I said what I said, and if you read my entire statement, you'll see that, I was right. Well, they testified that they, got hit and beaten. How is that tourist stuff? How does your statement? Well, you're not doing my complete statement. If you do my complete statement, and Raskin said, okay, fine, I'll read your complete statement. That doesn't match what was going on here. Well, you see, it proves it. It was like, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? How are you trying to defend yourself here? But, kept interrupting. Well, you're trying to get me to do something here. Well, I'm just trying to get you to retract your statement, but I'm not sure how the House rules allow you to basically make this guy look like a fool as part of a committee hearing. We're supposed to be talking about the rules. This is the Rules Committee. How are you making me talk about this?
Yeah, good question. I would love to take a look at the video of that. Maybe we can dig it up. And analyze
because there is video because I was watching it yesterday. And I said, wow, this is great. I don't understand how they can get away with doing this, but this is fantastic.
I don't know. Maybe the guy with the gavel fell asleep. Who knows?
Well, that's what happens when you have a Democrat as a gavel person, right?
Yeah, they're very sleepy, Democrats.
He who has the gavels makes the rules.
Right, even if they're not looking. Sometimes that's the rule. I don't know. I wasn't paying attention. Don't know what happened.
So Jim Jordan is on Fox News. As Sin points out, in a long rambling answer, Jim Jordan admits he talked to Trump on January 6th. When asked what they discussed, Jordan changes the subject to the speaker and security posture and how it's all Nancy Pelosi's fault.
Yeah, I don't know.
And Josh Marshall saw that and said, Jim Jordan spoke to Trump on the 6th while he was refusing to call off the insurrectionists. What'd you talk about, Jim?
Seems strange, right, yeah.
That's what Liz Cheney meant when she said Jim Jordan was a material witness.
Yes. Right, and he just said so right there. I need to be called to testify on this. I spoke to the person suspected of plotting the whole thing in the middle of it. Really? What'd you talk about?
Well, I talked to the president. This is what he said. I talked to the president so often, I don't remember what we talked about. What would jog your memory about what happened?
Right. Yeah, that's fine. I don't mind having that testimony. It would look foolish. I'm happy to have that on the record.
But I talk to him so often, I don't remember what was said. And by the way, it's all Speaker Pelosi's fault.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny.
As
that
a
was
separate
supposed to be the
aside,
message.
somebody yesterday tweeted one of those fun things like, tell me how old you are without telling me how old you are.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Right? And my reaction was, I remember exactly where I was when John Kennedy was shot.
Right. Sure. Yeah.
And so the idea that Jim Jordan wouldn't remember what happened because he talks to the president so often, as if in the context of what was going on in the Capitol that day,
yes,
somehow didn't form and crystallize in his memory step by step. That's nuts.
Yeah, it would be real interesting. And I'd like to know, when during the day they spoke. Of course, all of that stuff you'd have to pull. I can't remember. Well, how many times have you spoken to the president where gunshots rang out in the background?
Yeah, right. And you had to hide under your desk.
Yes.
That happened all the time. I mean, something about that kind of, frees your memory about what happened there.
Yeah, I'd like to know. Yeah, well, that was pretty amazing. And I mean, maybe there, I don't know if it would have happened in a different context, but maybe there Kevin McCarthy feels like, well, I guess I was going to say like he dodged a bullet, except he didn't. He gets hit by this particular bullet. But the idea was to put Jim Jordan on this committee because he's, a message person, despite all the truth of it. He'll just deliver whatever the message is and be disciplined about it. And I don't know how that happened. In the middle, was it Fox he was on? And how did they elicit this? He was supposed to go on there and deliver the message that it was Nancy Pelosi's fault. Everybody did that all day long on the Republican side, and several outside press conferences designed to distract attention from the hearings. Didn't work.
He was on Brett Baier, and Brett Baier kept asking.
Yeah, I mean, that's so. Tell us a little bit about what you did today. Well, first I woke up. Then I just want to say for the record, to document, I committed a terrible, terrible crime. I was totally involved in it. But what I came here to say today was really, can't we all get along, or whatever, whatever the message is supposed to be. That's a totally unforced error. And I don't know, maybe McCarthy figured if he's in attack mode in the committee, he won't make that mistake. And he might not, because he'd be focused. And this, he's sort of aimless and just doing what every other Republican was supposed to do. And he can't do that. That's interesting in itself. The basic mission of every Republican of the day, not interesting enough for Jim Jordan. And he loses focus, right? Gets the twisties, doesn't know where he is, and says,
right,
I spoke
exactly.
to the president.
That's exactly what happened.
What did I do that for?
Yeah, and muscle memory isn't helping you, and now what?
Yeah. Wow. Well, good. That ties things together in a nice way. What a dummy.
Let me give you that.
You wouldn't want him to go out on the floor in that.
From Josh Marshall.
Okay.
There it is. There's that tweet. So you can actually later play the video and hear exactly what he said.
Let's do that.
So it's a minute and 14 seconds of humma, 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 humma.
Yeah. I'll take a look at that because that's pretty amazing. Jim Jordan was at, we need to clarify this too, and I'm still not 100% sure how many outside Republican press conferences there were trying to distract from the hearings. I was focused on the one yesterday, and Kevin McCarthy was there at that one, and I think Jim Jordan may have been at that one, which was supposed to be the more serious Republicans, but it was the same message. They were there to say that it
that was leadership, yeah.
Pelosi's fault for not having more Capitol Police there, even though later today you will see that we hate the Capitol Police and they should never have been there in the first place. Then there was a second.
I'm conveniently forgetting about the fact that the one person who's in charge of the D.C. National Guard isn't Pelosi.
Right, yes.
It's Donald Trump.
Right, but he's, of course, also, we found out later in the hearings, he's also the hitman who sent them. So, he's the guy, what's the movie reference for this? He pulls the police guards away from the hospital where Don Corleone is recuperating. And
exactly.
Pelosi is Michael arriving there, realizing, oh my God, there's nobody guarding my father.
Right.
So,
exactly.
Yeah, that doesn't really work. So, at any rate, there were two press conferences, and I thought all the crazies, there was a troll-filled press conference that was planned for yesterday, but it hadn't taken place during the morning when we were doing the show. It was scheduled for the afternoon. That one wasn't focused on it's Nancy Pelosi's fault for not calling out the National Guard, but instead was at the Department of Justice in front of DOJ, Main Justice, as they say. There's the terminology for you, right? Like if you just say at the Department of Justice headquarters building, right? No. people who know what they're talking about call it Maine justice. And now I know that you don't know what you're doing, Mr. Investigator. But their press conference was to protest the treatment of January 6th prisoners, that they were political prisoners, that this was being done for political reasons, that they were being mistreated, that somehow they were in Guantanamo, etc. All these guys who showed up at this press conference used to cheer for Guantanamo. We should not feed them. We should torture them, as a matter of fact, down in Guantanamo. But our poor QAnon shaman who got his vegan menu served to him, organic vegan menu, he's being mistreated. Well, that was the gist of this press conference, and I don't even know whether they even got that message out. But
no,
the real
I don't think they ever
excitement of
did.
the day was that the press conference was broken up by protesters who ended up chasing all these lunatics away, and it was an all G lineup minus one: Matt Gaetz, Paul Gosar, Marjorie Trader Green, Louis Gohmert, and then what? Andy Biggs was the one.
Yeah,
although he has two G's in his name, it's just they're not first.
Right.
And they broke this thing up and chased everybody away, and they all ran away and climbed in cars and escaped the press conference when the protesters showed up. So there's some great footage of that. I just wanted to note for the record that it also made for one of those great how it's going, how it started, how it's going memes, because Marjorie Trader Green's career, such as it is, started as being the annoying gadfly who chased people down the street and made them run away and filmed themselves asking the tough questions that they just won't answer. And then yesterday, her career reached the point where she was the one being chased down the street, being asked tough questions that she wouldn't answer. She, of course, did that with David Hogue, the survivor of the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas shooting in Parkland just a couple of years ago, and chasing him down the hallway. And then she did it. Then she wanted to do it to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and to several others in Congress. And she found out yesterday, hey, this tactic is not actually all that cool. I don't like it a great deal when it's done to me. Dish it out, can't take it. You know, I think you always knew that was the story of Marjorie Trader Green.
Right.
But that was the second press conference. Jim Jordan was not at that one. He's not crazy enough to be at that one. He's a leadership guy, not a crazy guy. How about that for the current state of the Republican Party?
Yep.
Bad news.
So, all of that's true. I should acknowledge that there's a pandemic going on, and there's a lot to talk about that. Maybe we'll do some of that tomorrow.
Sure. Got a lot
But
of that
the one
Monday.
piece of it that I did want to mention, because I just think it's kind of extraordinary,
Mm-hmm.
is the ongoing discussion about why all of a sudden the Republicans have decided that it's a pretty good idea if you guys get vaccinated.
Oh, yeah?
And,
What
for
is the
example,
why of that?
this one, Eli Yokley is pointing out, Eli's senior reporter for Morning Consult, Leader McConnell plans to run 60-second radio ads on more than 100 Kentucky radio stations in the coming days promoting the vaccine with money from his re-election campaign.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And Josh Marshall has been speculating that what's going on here is that the Republicans sort of made a bet early on to resist everything about the pandemic, and then hopefully Biden would get it under control, and then it would die down. And since nobody cared about the pandemic, they could do their usual. I'm summarizing here.
Yeah.
They could do the usual dog and pony show and blame everything on the Democrats and move on to whatever it is they wanted to talk about. And instead, the virus is spiking in areas like Missouri and Louisiana and Florida, and it's not going well. And they realize that people are really starting to get mad at the people who haven't gotten vaccinated. And from a political point of view, their bet is not paying off, and how they're starting to worry that they're going to get blamed if things get worse. And so now they've, switched the messaging and turned to, we better get on this and do everything right.
Yeah, well, they'll turn from blaming the people who didn't get the vaccine to the people who told them not to get the vaccine. Us.
That's what folks are. Yeah, that's what he's worried about.
Yeah. So
that's why these messages are coming from his re-election campaign.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, to motivate him to burn re-election campaign money on that,
something's going on here. It isn't just coincidence.
Precious dollars, right?
Yeah. Now we're talking about money.
I hadn't thought about the possibility of using campaign money for that. But yeah, so then you'll see, I was campaigning on the importance of the vaccine since da-da-da-da-da. But interesting. They're all still anti-mask, though, and now that the CDC is, I guess, recommending that at least under certain circumstances, I don't know what the circumstances are, we go back to being masked indoors, which has set off a whole different set of people and with a different set of protests, none of which makes any sense. I mean, it's the simplest thing in the world. And
well, Jeremy Faust sums it up, ER doc. The CDC hasn't backtracked on masks. The unvaccinated didn't heed the call to stay masked in far too many areas. Cases and hospitalizations have blown up in those places. The CDC's responded to our collective behaviors, and they haven't backtracked. There, I said it. That's the science.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess so.
No, you didn't do what we asked you to do, and so now you have to do it this other way.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm sorry, 4-year-olds.
Yeah, and those are the kids who usually won't wear the masks. That's what I always hear about. You know, the toddlers refusing to wear the mask. Toddlers and full-grown Republicans. Yes.
Yeah. So, DeSantis is no mask Florida, says the Miami Herald. DeSantis fueled culture wars over masks, and so, of course, Florida leads COVID surge.
It does when it reports, right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's no joke. Florida leads the nation, and hospitalizations are surging to a horribly familiar crisis point. In Florida, the hospitalizations are up to what it was during the last peak. I mean, that's how bad it is.
Yeah. It's really
everywhere else, it's a lot lower than that.
Except Missouri. They've got it.
Missouri's got it, and Louisiana is fastly approaching that as well. So there's some real super-duper hotspots, and so this is real. That's obviously going to affect the economy. And again, the Republicans are worried all of a sudden that now they're going to get blamed for this, just like they're worried they're going to get blamed for January 6th.
Yeah.
And you know what? They're responsible for both.
Right.
And so that's why I haven't conceded that they're taking the House in 2020.
Okay. Yeah, that's true. That's a good, nice political ending to it. And, that was always kind of part of the motivation of showing the map every day of who's got the highest new daily counts. It becomes very obvious when Red America is driving this thing. Everybody sees it. So we'll come back tomorrow. Talk about it again. All right, welcome back to the where I have the twisties. I've lost track of where. I don't mean to belittle this thing. I'm just sort of illustrating how it can happen to anybody in different contexts. Just happened to happen to Simone Biles in a very high risk, high profile, and dangerous context. But I thought we did pretty well in tying together a number of disparate threads. It's almost as if everything sort of is connected at some level in our societal interactions, and you can make parallels between different worlds pretty easily. But yeah, just during the break, Greg was noting that you can get the political twisties, and it can really cost you, as Admiral Stockdale did way back. Now, this is one of those "Are you old enough?" questions. Admiral Stockdale, during the vice presidential, was it during the debate, I guess, 1992, he was Ross Perot's running mate, and he thought he was making a joke that everybody would empathize with, and he would bring them into his, circle of trust with this self-effacing joke about who am I, what am I doing here, kind of thing. But it ended up just, if you're gray-haired and nobody knows you, and you're a gray-haired man, an older gentleman, and, looking kind of out of place and owlish, and then you start saying things like that, they start taking you seriously and start writing a story about Admiral Stockdale was confused and didn't know where he was. I was just kidding. I'm actually pretty sharp. I know exactly what I'm talking about. I was making a joke. Oh, yeah, sure, old man. Well, his whatever political instincts I guess he may have thought he had, even if he thought he had none, abandoned him as he got the twisties in midair on the debate stage, forgot where he was, forgot that his audience was a bunch of idiots who were only there to cover how it looked on TV, and poof, the career went up in smoke. And along with it, it was never going to succeed anyway, but along with it, the candidacy of Ross Perot. Not that he didn't try to come back and do that. There's another guy who didn't get told to just go away after a resounding defeat, even though Hillary Clinton's defeat was not that resounding, and depending on how you look at it, wasn't a defeat at all. But they wanted her to go away. Ross Perot got a second chance to run. But whatever. Okay. So So where were we? There's a couple of things that I wanted to get to, although one of the things that Greg queued up for us was the weird, accidental, twisties-induced confession of Jim Jordan. And I think I've got that clip more or less at the ready, but I guess I got to click through a couple of times. I put it on the big show-running computer, and I think the video will start auto-playing before I get to turn up the sound.
On a number of different roads. About
so now we'll back up so we can hear the whole thing.
Committee's obviously going to go.
Okay, one of the vagaries of trying to make this thing just stop so I can introduce it and play it. Brett Baer interviewing Jim Jordan. And I guess, so here's the setup. I was hoping that it would start more cleanly, but it's not the case. Let's go.
Committee's obviously going to go down a number of different roads about who knew what when, who was talking to coordinators of the protest. Did you talk to the former president that day?
I've talked to the former president umpteen times, thousands. I mean not thousands times, but countless times. I talked to the president. I never talk about what we talk about because I just don't think that's appropriate. Just like I don't talk about what happens in Republican conferences. So I've talked to the president numerous times. I continue to talk to the president since he's left office.
On January 6th, Congressman.
All right. So there's the crux of the thing: is he does realize what he's being asked, and he does try to obfuscate and say, gosh, I don't know how many times I spoke to the president. I can't remember one specific time, et cetera. But I know he realizes what he's being asked, because then he begins with the other thing. I never talk about what we talked about. That's almost certainly untrue. I mean, it would be good practice, but what he means, of course, is if it's damaging to the party, I would never talk about what we talked about. However, if it is to the advantage of the party, I will come on television every time and talk about what we talked about. And, a good researcher, and I guess to go back to the story of the congressional investigators and how they work, if it was important to building the case that Jim Jordan claims incorrectly, most likely, that he never talks about what he talked about with the president after speaking to the president. If he were resting on that as, on principle, I never talk about such things, and that's why I won't answer your questions. It might be worth, they'll get past it. They don't actually need it in this case, but it might be worth having, for example, a super cut video of all the times that he's been on Fox News telling them what he alleges he talked to the president about, because it inures to his benefit or to the party's benefit. And so now that we've seen, Congressman Jordan, that you love talking about what you talked to the president about when it's to your advantage, can we just assume at this point that the content of the conversation would not be to your advantage or to the party's advantage now that you are standing there saying that you refuse to tell us what you talked about? But then all of that wouldn't matter as much because, and this goes to the question of whether or not he belongs on the committee in the first place, that he's a material witness. In other words, he doesn't want to talk about what it is that he spoke to the president about on that day, but there are ways of trying to compel him to do so. That is to say, he could be asked, be subpoenaed before the committee as a witness and asked point blank, what did you talk about? Now, he may still decline to say so, but there's no clear-cut excuse for him not to tell. I mean, he might try to say executive privilege, but I don't know that that is going to fly, and we can talk a little bit about why that might not fly, citing what's going on with Mo Brooks. But it is, I guess he has a better shot at it in saying, well, I was a congressman inside the Capitol building talking to the President of the United States. That's a little closer to within the official scope of my duties, and so therefore something. But it would be highly questionable whether or not, for instance, the conversation is privileged in some way because of some claim of executive privilege. The claim at this point would not be Trump's to make. He's no longer the executive. And the discussion, to the extent that it was about what was happening at the Capitol on January 6th, might also not, in fact, fall under executive privilege because it doesn't have anything to do with the official execution of Trump's job, which would have been the peaceful transfer of power at that point, not leading an insurrection against the United States government. There might not be any privilege for that. But at any rate, here is Bret Baier saying, well, I'm not asking you about the many, many times that you've talked to the president. I'm asking you, did you speak to the president on January 6th? And he's insistent. That's good. He wants an answer to that, and let's find out what it is.
Yes, I mean, I've talked to the president. I've talked to the president so many. I can't remember all the days I've talked to him, but I've certainly talked to the president.
Yeah, and on that day can you share any of the insight of what he was thinking about that day?
Brett, the people we need to come testify are the people who can testify to the fundamental questions. Why didn't the United States Capitol, the People's House, have an appropriate security posture on that day?
All right, so he's avoiding the question again, but I guess, then I guess it's questionable about whether or not he in fact confesses to having spoken to the president on that day. On the other hand, there's some other things you can subpoena to find out whether that was the case, like your phone records, or just, I guess you might be able to get the content of the phone conversation. That'll be harder to get, but phone logs, his own phone logs, the White House phone logs. Let's have an answer as to whether or not you spoke to him. But he does a pretty good job recovering, better than I thought. I thought he blurted out, yeah, I talked to him. You're goddamn right, I ordered the code red. That's basically what I thought I was going to hear. But so far I haven't heard it. And it almost sounds like Baier is ready to give up and allow him to continue on by saying, well, it doesn't matter what we spoke about. I don't even remember whether we spoke or not. I've spoken to him so many times. But what we should have been speaking about was why Nancy Pelosi screwed the whole thing up. And but there's still a couple seconds left in the clip here. Let's see if Baier lets him go.
And what have we done? Those are the people we need to hear from. Yeah. That's the information and testimony we need to get. That's what we should focus on. But I don't think that Benny Thompson, the chairman of this committee, said everything's on the table until we raise this issue about the Speaker's office is the one who knows what the security posture and why it was the way it was. Once we raise that question, he said, well, everything's on the table.
Because he gets away with it at that point. But Bret Baier just about gets there. And just about gets him to admit that he had talked to the president. That's a very interesting, because the answer could have been no. I mean, I've talked to the president lots of times, but I definitely didn't talk to him on January 6th. I definitely remember that. So I guess just his fumbling alone is what we've got. But, he was thrown off his game there, and by a friendly interview. I didn't really expect that to be the case. All right, well, let's see. Moving on from there, I mentioned Mo Brooks, and he becomes a big story as well. And there's lots of different ways to approach this story, and I can't decide which one to go with first. There's the Let me borrow, I guess, from this the more tongue-in-cheek approach to it from Wonkette. Why not? And then, or should we do that? Or then we'll give the Washington Post dry account of it. We'll have to go back and give the dry account afterwards. Wonkette, Liz Dye, writing this piece. Looks like Alabama Congress doofus Mo Brooks is about to go through some things. A couple of throwback references there. Let's see what she's got for us here in the Wonkette style. Snake eyes, it says. Yesterday, Mo Brooks, the Alabama congressman and senatorial hopeful, struck out twice in his bid to get anyone, to take over for him in the tort suit filed by his fellow representative Eric Swalwell for Brooks's alleged incitement of the insurrection. Right? I don't think we've discussed the suit itself, but they link to their own coverage of it. But just to give you the background, Eric Swalwell is suing Trump and friends for inciting an insurrection. Let's talk about that, writes Jamie Lynn Crofts back on March 7th in Wonkette. But yeah, Swalwell filed a lawsuit. And it's all just, I was hoping to link. Yeah, there's I guess the more serious coverage of it is, I guess this is just the the actual documents itself filed with the district court in D.C. But yeah, Eric Swalwell suing Donald Trump Jr., and Mo Brooks, and Rudy Giuliani, by the way, the 4 named defendants in this thing, for inciting the riots, inciting the insurrection. But back to Mo Brooks' latest story. So where were we? There's the suit, and he's looking, the basics of it here is Mo Brooks is looking for a way out and saying, I have to be dropped from this suit, or the government has to defend me, whether that's the DOJ or the House counsel or something, because his main theory here is, well, I'm a congressman, and I thought I was like allowed to say stuff, even like illegal stuff, because I was a congressman. Like, don't they say something about speech and debate clause, right? I can say anything I want and I can't be prosecuted for it. Well, yeah, if you're in debate in the House. And not just in the House, but in the course of your official duties. The question is, were you, in the course of your official duties, showing up at a Trump rally and making the comments you did that incited people to storm the Capitol? And, offhand, most people probably, sane people would say, well, the answer is no. You're at a campaign event. I mean, that's at the bottom of it. The claim is you're at a campaign event and it can't be part of your official duties because it's illegal for part of your official duties. You can't claim it's an official function to do a campaign event. They have to be kept separate. And of course, he's all dressed up, camo hat, outdoor gear, etc., blah, blah, blah. He's not dressed like he's dressed for work. There's already there's an initial visual clue that he's not doing something in the course of his regular work. But there's also the fact that it's a campaign rally. And anyway, the news part of it is the DOJ finally did come to that conclusion. No, you weren't acting within the scope of your official duties at the time, so the DOJ won't be defending you. The House counsel shouldn't be defending you. You should have to pay for this out of your own pocket. You might be able to steal that from your leadership PAC or even possibly from your campaign funds. But no, there's no help forthcoming from the government to pay for your defense, nor are you immune from suit because of the speech and debate clause. That's the upshot of it. But here's how Wonkat tells it. They make it funnier. You see, today is the day, as he said during the speech that he's being sued for, today is the day American patriots start taking down names and kicking ass, Brooks demanded of the screeching mob on January 6th. Now, our ancestors sacrificed their blood, their sweat, their tears, their fortunes, and sometimes their lives to give us, their descendants, an America that is the greatest nation in world history. So I have a question for you. Are you willing to do the same? My answer is yes. Louder. Are you willing to do what it takes to fight for America? Louder. Will you fight for America? Well, we all know what happened next. Swalwell alleges that Brooks, along with Rudy Giuliani, Donald Trump, and Donald Trump Jr., committed various torts against him, including conspiring to violate his civil rights. And, maybe. Brooks spent weeks dodging the process server because he is a very serious grown adult and former member of the Alabama Bar. You remember this? I think we may have made mention of this at some point, that he was furious and alleged that he had been attacked in his home because a process server looking to serve him with the papers of notice that Eric Swalwell was including him in this suit. And Brooks's game was, well, if they never let me know, if they never give me the papers that say I'm a defendant in the suit, then I can't be a defendant in the suit. And that's my first line defense against it. I won't actually stand up and defend myself from what I said. I will try to hide from notice that I'm being sued, which is interesting because now I wonder whether is Mo Brooks one of the Republicans saying that the Texas Democrats who have fled the state to deny the state Senate a quorum should be arrested for not facing up to reality and doing their jobs and accepting responsibility and yada yada while he was ducking the process server for so long. But you may remember that I think the process server waits around his house, and when he sees him arrive at home, he pulls into the driveway and runs after him on the way into the house because he's just seen him arrive there. And Brooks was like, he blocked my driveway. He barricaded me and my wife in the house. So she could have been killed somehow. But, anyway, none of that was true. But Brooks, who spent weeks dodging the process server because he's a very serious grown adult and former member of the Alabama bar, after finally getting served, Brooks claimed in a filing earlier this month that he was acting within the scope of his official duties when he dispatched a crowd of lunatics to storm the Capitol. Citing the Westfall Act, which requires the government to substitute itself as defendant when a government employee faces a tort claim on the job, Brooks then demanded that the DOJ swoop in and save him from his scary colleague. Or, barring that, he'd like the House itself to take over his legal defense. Brooks's arguments ranged from the plausible, he was commenting on a matter of public interest, to the idiotic, he drafted and practiced his ellipse speech in the Rayburn office building, and so therefore official scope of his duties, as opposed to, no, that just means you're actually guilty of a second infraction, using official resources for political purposes, practicing your speech in the Rayburn office. But the gravamen of his argument appears to be that his constituents just really, really like Donald Trump. So anything he does to support the great man is definitionally constituent services. It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Well, here's an actual line from his motion. Brooks sought to encourage the Ellipse rally attendees to put the 2020 election behind them, and in particular, the preceding day's 2 Georgia GOP Senate losses, and to inspire listeners to start focusing on the 2022 and 2024 elections, which had already begun. Brooks sought to inspire Ellipse rally attendees to exercise their First Amendment rights by chanting the words USA, which are not words, they are letters, but okay. Says Wonkette. Shockingly, the government failed to be persuaded by this logic. The record indicates that Brooks's appearance at the January 6th rally was campaign activity, and it is no part of the business of the United States to pick sides among candidates in federal elections, the government wrote in its reply last night. Members of Congress are subject to a host of restrictions that carefully distinguish between their official functions on the one hand and campaign functions on the other. The conduct at issue here, thus, is not the kind a member of Congress holds office to perform, or substantially within the authorized time and space limits as required by governing law. The DOJ agreed with Representative Zoe Lofgren, I think she says, chair of the Committee on House Administration, who wrote that Brooks's reference to 2022 and 2024 was an explicit admission that his conduct was instead furtherance of political campaigns rather than a part of his official duties. You see, that's very interesting, the way this works here. I guess I should have stopped and commented on it when we were reading the quote from Brooks's own actual motion filed with the court. He's saying basically, I think what he's trying to say here is when he's saying, are you willing to stand up and fight for America? Our ancestors sacrificed their blood, their sweat, their tears, their fortunes, and sometimes their lives to give us America. I have a question for you. Are you willing to do the same? My answer is yes. Louder. Are you willing to do what it takes for a fight for America? Louder. Will you fight for America? I think he thought, obviously because as they say here in this article, we all know what happened next. The implication I think Swalwell's trying to draw here, and that a lot of people drew, was that he was, they were taking him at his word, fighting for America. And then they immediately went and got in a fight. And so they said, isn't that incitement to this riot? And Brooks is saying, no, I wasn't saying that they should literally go and sacrifice their blood, sweat, tears, fortunes, and sometimes lives and fight for America by going down the street and getting in a fight immediately. I was speaking metaphorically, that they should fight hard by voting for Republicans in 2022, 2 years hence, and 2024, 4 years hence. You see, I wasn't rallying them to an immediate fight that then in fact took place in front of everybody. I was telling them they should be politically charged and politically motivated for 2 elections in 2 and 4 years from that point, respectively, you see. That's what I meant. I was just saying go vote. Don't go punch cops right now at the Capitol. Well, that's an unlikely story to begin with. But to make matters worse, Zoe Lofgren points out, well, that's an interesting point. Suppose we take you at your word that you were in fact rallying people for political purposes about an election that was set to take place 2 years away and 4 years away, even though you were saying, well, it starts right now. I mean, no, not really. It's actually quite a distance away. But if it were true that you were only talking about elections, then she points out, well, that's an open and shut case in terms of whether or not you were acting within the scope of your employment. You said you were there as a government official, and now you also say, well, my whole speech was really about a campaign, which basically belies your claim that you were there as a government official. So, no, we can't defend you. Actually, quite deft, I think, on Zoe Lofgren's part. So there you have it. The Brooks' reference to 2022 and 24 in his motion is an explicit admission that his conduct was instead in furtherance of political campaigns rather than part of his official duties. And so, both the Justice Department and the House General Counsel informed the court last night that they would not be jumping in to save Brooks's sagging bacon, as they put it, given that the underlying litigation was initiated by a current member of the U.S. House of Representatives individually suing another current House member individually and does not challenge any institutional action of the House or any of its component entities. The office has determined that in these circumstances, it is not appropriate for it to participate in the litigation, House Counsel Doug Leder wrote. So, Brooks is on his own in this one. Well, unless Donald Trump decides to do his old pal a solid and pick up the tab for this round. LOL. All right. And that's unlikely to happen at any point in the future, near future or distant future. Just Donald Trump doesn't pick up the bill for others. He will promise to do so, but he will not do it. So, yeah, that was pretty interesting and great call by Zoe Lofgren on that one. Not that I thought that the House Counsel was in danger of coming down in any other way. All right. Let's see. Other items on that front. The New York Times gave the drier description, I thought it might be the Washington Post, of what happened here in their headline. U.S. declines to defend Trump ally in lawsuit over January 6th riot. The move could mean that the Justice Department is also unlikely to defend former President Donald J. Trump in the case. That's interesting. That's the subheader on the New York Times piece. Katie Benner having written that one. It doesn't look like a terribly long piece, but I wonder if we can get right to that part. The Justice Department declined on Tuesday to defend a congressional ally of former President Trump in a lawsuit accusing them both of inciting supporters at a rally in the hours before the January 6th storming of the Capitol. We got the basic breakdown from, quite accurately, I think, from the Wonkette version of it. Now, this is interesting, too. The Justice Department's decision shows it is likely to also decline to provide legal protection for Mr. Trump in the lawsuit. Legal experts have closely watched the case because the Biden Justice Department has continued to fight for granting immunity to Trump in a 2019 defamation lawsuit where he denied allegations that he raped the writer E. Jean Carroll, and said she accused him to get attention. Right, so good point. So in that context, for some reason, they decided that his insistence that she wasn't his type and therefore couldn't have raped her was somehow within the scope of his duties as president, which is still baffling and quite amazing. And I think Armando was pointing out earlier today that now this sets up a really weird situation, and I think the argument in that one rested on the idea that Trump was being asked questions by a reporter who was asking him questions as president, and then he answered as president as opposed to as a candidate for office in 2020. And the weird notion that the presence of a reporter asking questions automatically transforms whatever dumb thing you do into officialdom. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. I have good news to report. Many more listeners like you are making critical contributions that keep our show on the air. Makes good sense, of course, and patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple. Now you can make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for helping keep you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all of your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. Yeah, I found Armando's discussion of these things online here from this morning's Twitter exchanges. In particular, I guess he had picked up on NYC Southpaw tweeting about the subject, saying, this is Southpaw saying, Garland DOJ snatches the cloak of the Westfall Act off Mo Brooks's shoulders, with a screenshot of the passage of the, I guess, the decision that makes that clear that he will not get the protection of the Westfall Act. And Armando commenting here saying, I'm curious if Brooks had said those things at the same venue, that is at the Ellipse, right, at a political rally, and saying he was, even now after the fact, referencing that he was talking about campaigns and voting, not actually fighting at the Capitol. But even so, curious whether if Brooks had said those things at the same venue while being asked questions by a Fox reporter, whether DOJ would have taken the same position. In granting Trump Westfall coverage in the Carroll case, DOJ argues a reporter's question immunizes everything. That is a interesting and shaky theory to be working on, that the presence of a reporter can turn manifestly non-official acts made at manifestly non-official venues into officialdom, like I was saying at the break. So, yeah, that's pretty weird and disturbing, and they might want to see if they can reconcile that. And by the way, his next tweet about the subject, reacting to Manu Raju's tweet about the subpoena posture of the January 6th committee. Chairman Benny Thompson told us, he says, that the Select Committee will, quote, soon issue subpoenas, but he declined to say who would be targeted. He said the panel won't resort to writing letters for voluntary information and will instead go straight to subpoenas, which is a very interesting and wise approach. There's another tweet that goes with this, a quote from Thompson. Letters just lengthen the time. We just want to get it all done, he told me. He also said they plan to meet with Attorney General Garland soon because they want access to all relevant data. And he said they would seek information gathered by impeachment investigators about the January 6th attack. That's also good news and of some interest. Armando commenting on the fact that Benny Thompson, and this is very interesting, I should read more about it, says, yeah, we're not going to go with, well, first we'll issue a letter asking you to please come testify, and then if after a certain period of time you haven't responded to that, or you do respond and you say, I declined to come there, then we'll subpoena you, and then we have to go through the process of waiting for the subpoena to be served, and then the deadline to pass. and you file suit and say that the subpoena should be quashed, and we litigate that, and this and that, and it goes on and on and on. Armando saying, yeah, 3 years later, and it's really like 13, 23 years later, they figured it out. By the way, get into court as soon as possible as well. Give the minimum amount of time and then go to court on the following day. Right. Skip the letters asking for voluntary testimony. Go straight to the subpoena. But you didn't write me a letter inviting me first. Well, we don't have to. And that's been the practice in the past, and it's failed. So we went straight to the subpoenas. And by the way, you have until X date to show up. And on X date plus 1, we go to court compelling you to show up and asking for the marshals to round you up and drag your ass in here. That's the way they ought to handle it. I think he's right. So I wanted to sort of put that on the record as well. Where do we leave off? Oh, right. At the New York Times dry version of what happened with Mo Brooks. Maybe we'll read a little bit more about it. But it was a good setup on the issue of the Carroll case being somehow differentiated here. The Brooks decision also ran counter to the Justice Department's long-standing broad view of actions taken in the scope of a federal employee's employment, which has served to make it harder to use the courts to hold government employees accountable for wrongdoing. Brooks did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Lawyers for the House also said on Tuesday they declined to defend Brooks in the lawsuit. Given that it does not challenge any institutional action of the House lawyer wrote in the court filing, it is not appropriate for it to participate in the litigation. Then more background on Swalwell's suit. Citing excerpts from the speeches, Swalwell accused the various defendants, of violating federal law by conspiring to prevent an elected official from holding office or for performing official duties, arguing that their speeches led Trump's supporters to believe they were acting on orders to attack the Capitol. Swalwell alleged that the speeches encouraged Trump supporters to unlawfully force members of Congress from their chambers and destroy parts of the Capitol to keep lawmakers from performing their duties. During the rally, Brooks told attendees that the United States was, quote, at risk unlike it has been in decades, trying to mirror Trump speak there, and perhaps centuries. And he said that their ancestors, sacrificed their blood, sweat, tears, fortunes, lives, etc. We heard that part. Swalwell said defendants in his lawsuit had incited the mob and continued to stoke false beliefs that the election was stolen. As a direct and foreseeable consequence of the defendants' false and incendiary allegations of fraud and theft, and in direct response to the defendants' express calls for violence at the rally, a violent mob attacked the U.S. Capitol, Swalwell said in his complaint. Many participants in the attack have since revealed that they were acting on what they believed to be former President Trump's orders in service of their country. In June, Brooks asked that the Justice Department defend him in the case, citing the Westfall Act. That's not working. He described his speech on January 6th as part of his job, saying that his duties include delivering speeches, making pronouncements on policy, and persuading lawmakers. Justice Department rejected that. Inciting or conspiring to foment a violent attack on the United States Congress is not within the scope of employment of a representative or any federal employee, and thus is not the sort of conduct for which the United States is properly substituted as a defendant under the Westfall Act. That would have been something, right, if they had gone along with that argument. The United States government defending insurgents seeking to overthrow the United States government because they believe it was an official act of members of the United States government seeking to overthrow the rest of the government of the United States for official reasons. That would be pretty untenable, to say the least. All right. Not the only legal maneuverings of interest, and in fact, not the only legal maneuverings parked here in Pocket. Let's see. What did we want to go to from this? There was another weird legal issue happening yesterday. What was that one? Do I have it here? Is this the one? No. Now I'm trying to remember where we were with this, and it's not coming immediately to mind, but so many other fun things are here. Let's see. Oh, yes, right. There was the claim by Thomas Massie. Kentucky GOP Representative Thomas Massie had this to say. And I saw this reported down in the Courier Journal, his local paper. Kentucky Representative Tom Massie says he's suing Nancy Pelosi over the $500 mask fine. And he was tweeting about this yesterday and, of course, got everything wrong. And it was kind of funny. But I'll give you the base story first. Morgan Watkins reporting for the Louisville Courier Journal here. Massie said Tuesday that he and fellow Republicans, you'll never believe who, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Ralph Norman, are suing House Speaker Nancy Pelosi personally after they were fined for refusing to wear masks on the floor of the House of Representatives. This is not the first suit over those fines. I think Louis Gohmert filed one earlier, but he wasn't suing Pelosi personally over it. I don't know exactly who he was targeting, but he was just basically saying that he couldn't be made to pay these fines. But this is an interesting approach. I mean, it's wrong and dumb, and I'll explain why and how afterwards. Nancy Pelosi did this by edict, he says. There's no law. She changed this rule on her own. She did it unconstitutionally, Massie said at a Washington, D.C. press conference announcing their lawsuit. Of course, that's just crazy. Pelosi didn't do it by edict. The House, in fact, did adopt that rule. I think they put the mask rule and the authority to fine those who defied it in another rule for the consideration of another piece of legislation entirely. But they did, in fact, debate it. They knew it was in there. They held a vote, and the House did vote to adopt this authority for fines to be levied. So there's nothing about it that was by edict. True, there's no law. She didn't change the rule on her own, and it wasn't done unconstitutionally because, of course, as you know, the Constitution gives each house the prerogative here, the right to determine the rules of its own proceedings. But further, in that same clause, and I think we're talking about, well, the Article 1, is it Section 5, right, that says each house may determine the rules of its proceedings, including whether or not you have to wear a mask, but more than that, punish its members for disorderly behavior, and not so relevant, but maybe one day could become relevant for Marjorie Taylor Greene, with the concurrence of 2/3, expel a member. So, I mean, it's pretty clear-cut what the constitutional authority is here, and they went through all the proper procedures. They voted on it and everything, but he's just standing there saying they didn't. Pelosi announced the mask rule last year amid the still ongoing coronavirus pandemic. House Democrats later approved a rule allowing representatives to be fined $500 for a first offense and $2,500 for the next offense if they flouted the requirement. It says House Democrats approved the rule, but the House approved the rule. House Democrats were the only ones that provided the votes for it, but the House approved the rule. It's incorrect to say House Democrats approved the rule. The House's blanket mask mandate isn't in effect anymore, but Massie got fined $500 for refusing to mask up in May before the rule was lifted. So did Greene and Norman of Georgia and South Carolina, respectively. Massie publicized his decision to eschew the mandate, tweeting of Pelosi at the time, "Her rule is not based on science." And it was a rule. It was passed by the House. Before he said it wasn't one. But it's not based on science. All you need to know is the mask rule has only ever applied to members when they can be seen on TV. All three Republican representatives, challenged the fine, but last week the U.S. House Ethics Committee announced that they had lost their appeals. So now they're suing Pelosi. And it gets even more complex and weird. Does he describe why it is? Maybe it's not in this one, but I've seen elsewhere. I think maybe in his tweets, he describes what he's talking about here, saying, all you need to know is that the mask rule has only ever been applied to members when they can be seen on TV. Now, of course, they can be seen on TV when they are on the House floor because of the House cameras there that you and I know as C-SPAN, the feed that comes out from the House cameras. The cameras are there whenever they're in session. So if you're there when the House is in session, you can be seen on TV. What he's referring to here, he later, I think, clarifies in his tweets from yesterday, is he's saying, well, the rule didn't apply to Nancy Pelosi when she was caught on camera visiting a hair salon during the pandemic and not wearing a mask. You remember that brief controversy that arose over that? And he's saying, so I don't understand. I get fined when I don't wear a mask, but you didn't get fined. You didn't fine yourself when you didn't wear a mask. Now, I don't know. I can't recall offhand whether that incident actually happened after the House had implemented a masking rule or not. But of course, it wouldn't matter. The House masking rule only applies to when you're on the floor of the House. She was in a hair salon, dude. That's completely different. But, for MAGA America, well, she wasn't wearing a mask. Different setting, different place. Maybe also a bad idea, but not the House, right? If it's against the rules in the House to carry a baseball bat, but you're caught on a baseball field carrying a baseball bat, do we say, aha, hypocrisy? No, totally different place. Anyway, so they're suing Pelosi, and then he says it in this article and also in yesterday's tweets. He says, this is the funny-ish part. He's got a constitutional argument. I say the Constitution says the House has the right to pass these rules and the right to fine members for disorderly behavior, up and including, obviously, the right to define what constitutes disorderly behavior, like not wearing a mask when you're required to. But he has his own constitutional argument. He says, in this case, Nancy Pelosi's fine against us for not wearing a mask violates the 27th Amendment, Massey claimed on Tuesday, and I guess maybe that's during the tweet storm, or maybe at his press conference, but he does it again in the tweets. What is he talking about? They explain here in the next paragraph, the 27th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution says laws changing, and remember that, laws changing the compensation of members of Congress can't take effect in the middle of a 2-year congressional session. Generally, it's meant to prevent lawmakers from granting themselves raises midterm. And even that is just too generous. It's not just generally that that's the case. It is meant to prevent lawmakers from granting themselves raises midterm. And I guess they're trying to say, well, this fine wasn't a raise, it was a penalty, and so therefore it shouldn't apply. But it doesn't apply for other reasons. I'll get to that in a second. Massey suggested his decision, along with his two colleagues, to sue Pelosi isn't just a simple fight over getting fined, but instead carries greater significance. Why? Folks, we are here today not because of $500 in fines, but because the American people need somebody to fight. And they're, fight. And they're tired of people who won't fight, except this is in his official capacity. I guess he could get away with this one. And we are going to fight. And we have filed this case this morning. The CDC, of course, changed its mask guidance in May to say people who were vaccinated could stop wearing masks indoors, although the CDC was set to update that guidance later yesterday, and then they did do that. Massey, by the way, who tested positive for coronavirus antibodies last year, has publicly said he has not gotten vaccinated, and that's dumb and whatever. But now over to his tweet storm from yesterday, which will give us an opportunity to examine the 27th Amendment argument a little closer, but it doesn't really bear that much scrutiny. It takes about, a minute or two to dispense with this whole thing. So here's Massey tweeting yesterday. Speaker Pelosi violated the clear language of the 27th Amendment when she imposed the mask rules. And he attaches here an article from Cheryl Atkinson, I guess a right-wing blogger of some kind. May have called her name in the past at some point. Anyway, this is her thing at CherylAtkinson.com. Untouchable subjects, fearless, nonpartisan reporting. I doubt that very much. Here is her take on what's going on. Republicans sue Pelosi over unconstitutional mask fines. It's, quote, unconstitutional. 3 Republican members of Congress are suing, blah, blah, blah. Massey, Green, and Norman announced the lawsuit today to challenge the fines for declining to wear masks on the House floor on May 18th and May 19th of 2021. The Republicans say their refusal to mask was an expression of symbolic speech that is constitutionally protected by the First Amendment, and they point out that they took the stand on the very same day the Speaker herself chose not to wear a mask. Last September, Pelosi was criticized when she got caught violating her own and public health officials' recommendations and requirements by visiting inside a beauty salon, not wearing a mask, to have her hair treated, breaking rules that only permitted service outdoors. There is no record of Pelosi being fined for the infraction. Of course, the fine only applies if you were unmasked on the House floor. I can't believe that she can't figure this out. But let's see. So from the lawsuit, they quote, "This protest speech was a protest against the double standard being enforced by defendants, the well-founded beliefs shared by plaintiffs that mask wearing is not scientifically based, that mask wearing is not necessary for the vaccinated or naturally immune," which nobody says, "that mask wearing is merely political theater, that one's bodily integrity should be free from government control, that individuals should have the liberty to choose what they wear on their face, and that individuals should be free to make their own medical decisions," nothing of which has to do with anything with protocols on the House floor. Plaintiff's symbolic speech was also an effort to highlight recent scientific findings that the use of face coverings has no appreciable effect on slowing or halting the spread of COVID-19. As such, masks have become a modern-day political battleground between, inter alia, freedom and bodily integrity versus governmental overreach, and plaintiffs' actions and proceedings on the House floor without masks was quintessential symbolic speech. And I guess they might be able to make that claim, but no, I don't think that that's going to hold up, because it's never held up for dress code type things, nor public safety issues on the House floor. And it's amazing that that Marjorie Taylor Greene hasn't made the same claim about the gun ban on the House floor. Anyway, according to the lawsuit, Republicans are raising the four following claims, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, about that 27th Amendment thing, let's just head back to that one. Here's Massey saying she violated the clear language of the 27th Amendment. It doesn't really matter what the clear language is, because you don't actually have to address it. But yes, it is meant to prevent members of Congress from granting themselves pay increases without an election intervening, giving the people a chance to vote up or down on should the members of Congress get this new pay increase. It doesn't take effect immediately. You can't just start granting yourself money out of the Treasury. The 27th Amendment, by the way, the longest, was the one that took the longest to ratify. It was actually proposed, as I understand it, it was proposed as part of the, along with the original Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, and it wasn't until it was first ratified, there it is. Here's the notes. Congress submitted the text of the 27th Amendment to the states as part of the proposed Bill of Rights on September 25th, 1789. The amendment was not ratified together with the first 10 amendments, which became effective on December 15th, 1791, and in fact, the 27th Amendment wasn't ratified until the requisite proportion of states had ratified it on May 7th, 1992, when Michigan, not one of the original states, ratified it. It had met the, three-quarters threshold, and was thereafter adopted or considered adopted as an amendment to the Constitution. So it's our latest amendment as well, but that's neither here nor there. Here's what's going on. Did Pelosi violate the clear language of the amendment? No. Why is that? It's because the amendment discusses the compensation of members of Congress, and that compensation didn't change for Massey or anybody else. It's a simple amendment. No law varying the compensation for the services of the senators and representatives shall take effect until an election of representatives shall have intervened. You're out of luck on the senators. They can vote themselves a pay raise. But basically you got to have one federal election in between the vote to raise pay and the effectiveness of that pay raise, but no law varying the compensation, right? Well, one, there was no law involved here. It was a House rule. And two, no, compensation didn't change. Tom Massey was compensated the same as everybody else in the House and the same as he was compensated before the masking infraction and after. Then he got fined and he paid, or was asked to pay, his fine from out of his compensation. By the way, I think they probably would have accepted payment of the fine from his personal funds as well, probably not from campaign funds. That wouldn't have been allowed. But what happened here was, I think they actually, under the rule, gave themselves the authority to garnish the wages of members of Congress because, of course, they control the dispensation, the payment of the members. The House causes the Treasury to issue paychecks to them. Was it monthly? I think so. And so they said, well, for various reasons. I mean, remember that the only people who are going to be getting fined under this thing are people who are particularly untrustworthy. We can't trust you to follow the rules, and we can't trust you to pay the fine. So in order to make sure that the fine actually gets paid, we'll garnish your wages. I think they actually went ahead and did that. That would be the only basis in which he could start down the road of a claim of a 27th Amendment violation, because the check you actually issued him might have been lower than previous checks or checks to other members of Congress. But what is going on, of course, legally is, that's a fiction to say that your compensation changed. You were compensated the same amount as always, but your wages were garnished because you're so untrustworthy and we thought you would make political theater out of refusing to pay. The compensation is unchanged, though. And by the way, the proof of that will be in your tax filings next year. I would love to see your taxes next year because you will be claiming the same rate of compensation as everybody else and as you ever got in the House. The fact that you were fined won't have anything to do with it. And courts have been through this 100 million times with other people. No, garnishing wages is not a reduction in your wages. It's the payment of a fine and nothing more. So there you go. And official documents that you will be filing with the government through the IRS later this, or I guess next year, covering your wages paid in 2021 will state it quite plainly. Your whatever it is, W-2, I guess, will say what your wages were, and you know what? They're going to be the same as every other member of Congress who gets your same base pay rate because they're not a constitutional officer, will get additional pay, and you will see that your pay for the different pay periods was exactly the same as well. Just you had additional expenses out there. If you got a speeding ticket while you were on your way home, you wouldn't be able to say that it was a violation of the 27th Amendment to require you to pay, right? Well, same applies here. Well, that's all we have the time for today in terms of the various legal monkey shines that went on. But you know what? There's more out there, too. What will I have to save for tomorrow? There is the news. I guess we'll just tease it for you here at this point, that the Department of Justice also came out with another decision that will impact things around the January 6th Capitol attack. The DOJ saying that former Trump officials can testify in the hearings about the January 6th Capitol attack. Apparently, they sought some sort of prohibition on it or some way to avoid testifying if they're called, but the DOJ says it's okay to go ahead. So we can dive into the how and why of that at some point tomorrow. Our last show before our big hiatus. I have begun the task of recording at least some pieces for during the break. I have a feeling there'll still be some reruns interspersed in there, but I think we'll go with this weird experiment of just offering up bits and pieces of a full-size, full-scale podcast during the break. I've just been recording stories that I think are of interest, and they take however long they take, and the podcast will be of irregular length, and we'll make Justice Putnam do the work of programming around them. That'll require a little extra work, but I think he's got it all in hand and can take it in stride. But that way we just offer you a bite or two of something interesting each day, just so you don't have withdrawal symptoms. In the meantime, those of you suffering withdrawal symptoms from the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy have only a few seconds to wait before Justice Putnam takes over the mic for today. What will he be considering? Well, some of those comments from yesterday's hearings about the hitman who hired people for the January 6th riot. The far right wing of the U.S. House Republican Conference endorsed a bill that would ban teaching of basic constitutional history. You know, they had their eye on critical race theory.
NetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
In other news, the State Department is investigating how a swastika was carved into an elevator near the Special Envoy's office, and 140 U.S. lawmakers urge the EPA to reinstate California's authority to set vehicle emission standards. That and much more gets coverage with Justice.